We're joined now by Marcus Hayes, the ink-stained wretch. Marcus, how are you, pal?
Good, Pete. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you, and we appreciate having you on. We had we had on Captain Cantankerous yesterday. That would be one Mike Kern. I made up.
Yeah, Mike's a glass half something guy.
I made up that nickname for him just on the spot there, but I've never known him not to be able to be a little fired up. And of course, we talked about Villanova. So, Marcus, Villanova goes out. They're not able to have back-to-back championships, which is so hard to do. They also are the #1 overall seed. They have that early exit. Just some of your thoughts on Villanova and how their season ended.
Well, I think it was Miles Simon, the former Duke player who's now an analyst for ESPN, said the night of the game or the night before, he said, listen, Wisconsin is, wildly underseeded. And I think what he also wanted to say but didn't dare was that Villanova was probably overseeded. And I'm not a seedings guy. For my money, you could throw all the teams in a hat and pull them out. Unless you're the champion, I don't care. Sweet 16 and Elite 8 and Final Four, that's all marketing garbage. You're either the winner or you're not. So if Carolina plays Duke in the first round, so be it. But that, I'm the only guy in the world who thinks that way. But all that said, what happens when you have, subjective seedings, when you take into account silly things like conference tournaments and conference performance and things like that, is you get a Villanova as the #1 overall seed, and I'm not sure that you can make an argument that Villanova was the best team in college basketball at any given time this season. And that's what the #1 overall seed is supposed to be, the best college basketball team in that moment. So I'm not surprised that Villanova was beaten. I don't know if it was a huge upset. It might have been a minor upset. And again, one of my beefs with the NCAA and its basketball tournament is that it rewards the wrong things. It rewards making sure that you position yourself. You shouldn't be able to manipulate the system, and it's a pretty easy system to manipulate.
Well, one of the questions that I talked to Mike too then about was the fact that Duke basically had to play a road game against South Carolina.
Hey, you know what? You make your bed. Anybody who's a Carolina or Duke fan who wanted to see them playing in Greensboro, do it at the polls. You had a chance to have a home game. It became a road game because you're reactionary and you're homophobic. So let's just move on from that. It was moved to Greenville because the people in North Carolina, my parents are from North Carolina. It was moved to Greenville because the people and politicians from North Carolina are stuck in the 18th century.
Marcus Hayes with us from the Philadelphia Daily News and PhillyNews.com. Good points there, by the way. So I'll end the March Madness talk with this, that those first couple days of the tournament, you ask most people, and they say it's like Christmas and Hanukkah all wrapped up into one. I mean, they're so excited for first-round upsets and big thrillers and exciting moments. In your mind, Marcus, did the first 4 days of the tournament offer that, or did it come up short?
Again, I'm in the minority here, but I have no interest in the tournament until it gets down to, right around the 16 teams that are usually the 16 teams that are left are the 16 teams that should be there. I don't want to watch much college basketball because, especially in the last 10 years, in the era of the one or two and dones, it's degraded itself. It's been abysmal. So, and I watch a lot of NBA because, the players know how to, they know how to play basketball. And I really get behind teams like Wichita State or Villanova or Butler, where the players tend to stay longer and be better basketball players, if not the greatest athletes in the NCAA. So I don't watch a lot of the first couple of rounds because I'm not sure you get a good gauge of which teams are really good. You might get a pretty good team or a poor team that gets hot and bounces a team that is very good, that it doesn't have a good day or is missing a player or a guy's got a minor injury. When you get down to the Sweet 16, though, you really have some good basketball played. The best basketball of the year is played in the Sweet 16 because you have so many days off, lots of time to prepare, lots of time to get healthy. I start watching next weekend, not last weekend.
Marcus, speaking of the NCAA tournament and the NBA, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, I feel like it gets overlooked, the fact that nobody, I don't think, in my opinion, would have really considered Villanova to be where they were at this point in the tournament if it wasn't for Josh Hart and Chris Jenkins coming back and that rule that now allows these guys to go through that little discovery process that Josh Hart, Chris Jenkins went through.
Brunson's going to do it.
And now Brunson's going to do it. They realized that they weren't going to be top picks. They came back and allowed Villanova to have that continuity. Why do you think people are overlooking that so much?
Well, because nobody likes to admit they're wrong. Nobody, the NCAA and the NBA aren't going to promote something that should have existed from the beginning. It's a ridiculous concept to not have that rule. So they don't want to revisit it. They don't want to promote it. And really, a lot of the conversation is generated by those two entities, not the NBA necessarily, but by the NCAA and the departments that they represent. So, it always should have been that way. It should be that way in football. It's just ridiculous that a kid has to make that sort of life-altering decision, in the heat of a moment because they had a good conference and or NCAA tournament run, and they have 25 leeches begging them to get a shoe contract. So, yeah, congratulations on finally getting it right. But if they revisit it, they just have to admit they got it wrong for so long.
Marcus Hayes with us. Inkstained Wretch is his Twitter handle. That's why I referenced that. And you can find him at phillynews.com, a daily news columnist. Well, Marcus, an excellent piece again by you today as we talk about guys who are one and done. So we talk about March Madness. You highlight a couple of the Sixers players, specifically Dario Saric, who could be the Rookie of the Year. And then a guy, I remember when the draft night came out and we talked about this individual, a lot of people said, well, he's not even going to he won't be around. He'll be in the D-League or something. No, Timothy Luwawe-Cabarrot has certainly stepped up as well. Maybe explain to some of our listeners what your story was about today.
Well, it occurred to me about, 10 games into the season that the issues that Joel Embiid and Nerlens Noel and Jahlil Okafor had as young players, and I understand that Joel had 2 years extra to sort of prepare because he was injured, and Nerlens had 1, but Jahlil didn't, and all of them sort of had these sort of the rude awakenings where they were getting beaten up, where they couldn't manage themselves, they couldn't manage their bodies, they couldn't manage the rigors of the NBA mentally or physically. And I'm not saying that Dario Saric, who spent 5 years of his life playing professionally in Europe, or Timothy Luwawe-Cabarrot, or TLC as I like to call him, spent 4 years. I'm not saying they didn't have similar issues, but the issues were much less severe. They're healthy. They're able to exist on the road. They're able to thrive when they're home, just living in an apartment, dealing with minor bumps and bruises and injuries, going to work every day. This isn't a game anymore. This is a job. That's 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I guess, for Jahlil Okafor, he was a pampered high school AAU player. A year later, he was a pampered kid at Duke who, visited college for, 7 months. Then he was a man having a job that he had to go to every single day, play 80 games a year, wasn't in shape, and was spoiled and was not ready for that sort of responsibility. You don't see those issues with many European players. And I believe the reason that Saric not only has played every game, but played well in most games and is now a starter and probably could start on any NBA team is because he was ready to play as a grown man, as was Timothy Luwawe-Cabarrot. He's a little bit physically less advanced than Dario. However, mentally, he understands he's going to get what he deserves. He's going to eat what he kills. And all of the one-and-dones don't see the world that way. All of the one-and-dones are given everything. And they're young. They're 19, 20, 21 at the oldest. They're just not ready for this life. And it has hurt the NBA. The NBA is worse for it. They play them too much. They ask too much of them at too young an age. Dario's 22 and TLC's 21. That's when you should start your NBA career. The Sixers are now reaping those rewards, being competitive with those two guys in the starting lineup as rookies against the best teams in the NBA. They just beat the Celtics with those two guys in the starting lineup. That's amazing.
Marcus, looking at the Sixers, a lot of people, because the team is not going to get very far this season, obviously in the standings, they're looking ahead to the draft. And there's a lot of this obsession over, how many ping pong balls are going to get. And my contention, Marcus, is it doesn't matter, where you end up in the draft. What matters is who you pick in the draft. So I ask you, do you trust the Sixers front office to pick the right players?
I don't know. We have 1 year of example, and that's Ben Simmons with the number 1 overall pick. I like the Cabarrot pick. He's a true rookie. Dario played 2 years. Dario was drafted by Sam Hinkie and played 2 years in Turkey. So, if TLC is an indicator, sure. Ben Simmons, who I really, really liked in college, is an indicator, sure. I don't know. That's we can't really answer that question for 3 or 4 years with any sort of candor, because we don't know how the Colangelos, Brian Colangelo, the president, and Jerry Colangelo, the advisor, how they're going to act in this sort of iteration of the NBA with this ownership group and structure so analytics-based, so sports science-based, and how they're going to – they've never been in a position where they've had a Joel Embiid, and to a lesser degree a Jahlil Okafor and Dario Saric to build around. These are unique players. These are different types of players than they've had in the past. So it's really hard to know what they're going to do. And here's the key question. Do they need a point guard? Are they okay with T.J. McConnell being their starting point guard for the next 2 or 3 years? And if so, do you draft a 2-guard and make him a point guard, the way Steph Curry was made into a point guard? And you're right. It's not to me. It's not as important where you draft as what sort of drafter you are. Because if you look at Steph Curry and if you look at Klay Thompson, they're not top 3 picks, but they would be number 1 overall picks in any draft in retrospect.
We're talking to Marcus Hayes, the Philadelphia Daily News. You can follow him on Twitter at Inkstaindretch.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, easy for me to say. Marcus, I want to transition to the Eagles for a moment because I'm looking at this offseason. They got Alshon Jeffrey. They got Torrey Smith. They beefed up the interior of the offensive line with Chance Warmack. But really the only guy that they've brought in is Dwayne Gratz to help the secondary, which doesn't say much. I look at a secondary that gave up more than 250 yards in 7 games this past season. The guys with the most experience are Gratz, Ron Brooks, and Jalen Mills. I don't have a lot of confidence in the Eagles secondary at this point in time. Do you think the Eagles are maybe going to be looked too dependent on the draft when the cornerback position is a position that traditionally takes a while to develop at the NFL level?
Well, that's an excellent point. And I wrote a column about 2 or 3 weeks ago when they signed Jeffrey that this strategy of signing Alshon Jeffrey to a tryout contract and essentially signing Torrey Smith to a similar contract. There's no real guarantee for him or the Eagles past the first season, for him anyway, past the first season, where they could get rid of him very quickly. Those signings make sense if you have an established defense without a whole bunch of holes. If you had to draft a nickel or even a nickel and a lockdown, but if you had one cornerback you could count on, okay, fine. Those are signings that make sense because you think you can make it to the playoffs and change the culture and maybe you re-sign those receivers. But to your point, when you talk about what is their secondary right now, we have no idea. We don't know. We don't know, for example, if Malcolm Jenkins is going to be playing nickel again, the safety playing nickel. We have no idea. So it's this is a draft that's probably 4 or 5 rounds deep in cornerbacks who can contribute. And by contribute, I mean maybe start, certainly help you on special teams, certainly be around for 2 or 3 years. And people like to point to Lito and Lito Shepherd and Sheldon Brown. Well, Sheldon Brown and Lito Shepherd weren't great as rookies. They were good as second-year players and went to the Super Bowl. So, yeah, it takes a while to season cornerbacks, and it takes a while, especially because the cornerback position is officiated. It's litigated differently. 15 years ago, you could touch a guy. 15 years ago, you can knock a guy out. 15 years ago, if you were a receiver, you didn't have carte blanche. Now you have carte blanche, so the position is even more difficult to defend. And I think the cornerbacks coming out are certainly more advanced than, say, Lito or Sheldon or Troy Vincent and Bobby Taylor when they came out. But it took Bobby Taylor 2 or 3 years to be the guy that shut down Michael Irvin. So, yeah, I mean, the way the team is constructed, it's win now on offense and cross your fingers on defense.
Marcus Hayes with us from the Philadelphia Daily News. So Josh got the Eagles question. We talked Sixers. We talked March Madness. That leaves the Flyers. Marcus, full disclosure, I'm wearing a Flyers shirt today. And I was at the game against Columbus as a fan, and I thought your column the next day was awesome. I'm a sucker for good writing. And the opening line of, if you know you're going to die, then it's best to die at home. That's awesome. I mean, this Jekyll and Hyde team now, I guess the quote now, 8 days later, is they're not dead yet?
That's right. We love Monty Python.
Bring out your dead.
Well, their holy grail, obviously, is the Stanley Cup and getting to the playoffs. And not only getting there, being able to win in the playoffs, being able to win a round. Not a game, but win a round in the playoffs. And they're a long way from that. But they're supposed to be a long way from that. It's not a bad thing. It's never a bad thing to go to the playoffs. It's not a bad thing to get Shane Gostisbehere and Sean Couturier and Neuwirth or any of those guys more experience. The more experience you can get them, the better. However, the expectations for this team changed when they made the playoffs with a big push last year. They're essentially the same team they were last year, but the rest of the conference got a little bit better. So I'm actually planning to write tomorrow for the next day about how promising the Flyers look, not only, through the lens of, themselves in the NHL, but compared to the other teams around here. I mean, who's better? Who's the best, the most accomplished athlete in town right now is Claude Giroux. Number 2 and 3 might be Wayne Simmons and Jake Voracek. Maybe, you might have an argument for Malcolm Jenkins. And Jason Peters, for me, is, I don't think he should be on the team at this point. But you've got a really, really strong core of players and a lot of youth coming up. If anyone should be excited about anybody, it's the Flyers. And they would be excited if they hadn't made the playoffs last year. But making the playoffs and getting waxed by Washington, a team that wasn't engaged in that series at all, was fool's gold. And it was as much benefit as there. Internally, I think it's a huge benefit. Externally, I think it's a detriment. So I'm bullish on the Flyers. I think there's a lot there for them to be excited about. I would be excited. I hope they remain as patient at the next couple of trade deadlines as they did at this one.
We'll use the line from Trading Places. Buy, buy, buy. No, sell, sell, sell. It's Marcus Hayes with us from the Philadelphia Daily News as we throw out all the fun movie reference lines with him. Thank you so much for covering all the topics with us. And we know that you're an extremely busy guy. And I'll tell you what I told Mike Kern yesterday. Don't worry. I will be out there purchasing the hard copy of that newspaper so I can do my one small part to keep you writing.
Well, thanks, Pete. I'm gonna go buy some orange juice features now.
Attaboy, the Beaks Report. It's Marcus Hayes with us on the Sports Bash. Thanks, buddy. We really appreciate it.